Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, kia hia ki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei Maori ora. Kia ora koutou, ko titirangi te maunga, ko wai Aotearoa, ko ngai tama te rangi, ngā te hini wai atarua, me ngā te whaita ngā hapu. Ko Kim Hamilton taku ingoa, he kaiputahi rangahau mō community research. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. I'd like to acknowledge the community groups and NGOs from throughout Aotearoa who are tuning in today, and also a warm welcome to those from the US and Canada and other parts of the globe. So ata Māori e tātou katoa, he mihi mai o hākia koutou. Throughout the webinar, please, you're welcome to post questions in the Zoom chat feed. We will get to them at the end. We've got a pretty exciting morning this morning. We have 4 presenters, and we are discussing, I guess, community housing and Māori in Aotearoa. And we've got a range of key Māori researchers who have been involved in the latest research in building better homes, towns and cities, a National Science Challenge. So that's been happening over the last few years. So we're going to hear about case studies from the researchers in Aotearoa and the development of the platform for cross-sector action to address housing and homelessness issues in Aotearoa. So this webinar, you'll hear from them, and there's a chance to provide insight to your work in social service and community organisations, to look at some of the policy issues, to help with future research, planning and maybe funding priorities. So we have this morning in order, Dr. Di Menzies, then we have Rangimahora Reddy and Yvonne Wilson, and then to wrap us up we've got James Berghan, and they're all going to bring quite different perspectives to our session this morning. So I would like to begin. Actually, I just want to note too, they are from all around the motu. We have Di in Tāmaki Makaurau, we have James in Otako, and Yvonne and Rangimahora are in Kirikiriroa. So it was an appropriate karakia this morning. We are in the Four Winds, and I'm here actually zooming from Ōtautahi, so Morena koutou. So Dr. Di Menzies is Ngāti Kahungunu. She's a director of Land Cult Limited, a research and advisory consultancy, and her PhD is in resource studies. She was a director of Ministry for the Environment and a local councillor and a commissioner with the Environment Court. She's past president of the International Federation of Landscape Architects and now a senior member of Ngā Aho Māori Designers and a New Zealand representative at the ICO MOS IFLA Cultural Landscape Committee. So Di, over to you, Morena. Oh, Di?
To our panelists and our viewers. A brief tōku pepeha, I te taha o tōku papa, ko kahurana ki te manga, ko toki toki te awa, ko takitimu te waka, ko Ngāti Kahunu te iwi, ko Ngāti Whātui Apati te hapu, ko Di Menzies aho, as you have heard. So I'm going to talk about housing and change and community implications. This is part of a research project that I've been part of for the last year that is also going into another phase, and also a further building better homes, towns, city research project that is based in Glen Innes. So we'll be covering a little bit of territory. And so I'm hoping that for the viewers that the short PowerPoint that I've prepared is put up there, and on the first page of that are some of the other people that I've been working with. So particularly John Reid of Naitahu Research and Canterbury University, as well as Ella Henry, who has led the team to do with Glen Innes. So turning to the outline of what I'll be going through. First of all, talking about a MB funded Māori home ownership study, and that concluded onto the next page, if you don't mind. That concluded in June, and we found that home ownership is declining at an alarming rate. That means that very few Māori will own their own homes if the current structural and other issues, such as hugely high price of land and homes, continues at the current rate. And we have an invitation to you, for those that may be interested, to take part in the next stage of our project. I'm going to discuss the implications of the first project that was undertaken, and also the one to do with placemaking and cleanliness, particularly to do with emergency housing, and that was done jointly with the home ownership project. Social inclusion for new residents and cleanliness, and finally a little comment on social procurement. So first of all, next slide if you don't mind, looking at the Māori housing crisis. And I was told that you may be interested in methodology and how we went about this study. So just to outline, I did a literature search which was available for a number of other studies as well on Māori and Indigenous housing, including First Nations housing and so on. Having done a separate literature study for the economics project, we looked at a list of issues that arose from the literature search and then developed questions from that. So we had a list of 10 different questions that I went out and found iwi representatives, community housing providers, council staff, other community representatives from the Māori world, and those who built houses for Māori as well, and found that the questions were useful, but that people often wanted to tell their own stories, and we were grateful that they were able to do that, to give a very thorough background to the issue. So that was 25 from Auckland, Christchurch, Blenheim, and places in between. And we then analysed that into a range of topics and developed issues to do with what is happening now and what might be ideas that could happen with changes in structures. And we found that the issue actually was a largely structural issue, poverty, the current cost of housing and so on. If you don't mind moving on to the next one. So the next project that I was going to mention as well, do it at this stage to explain what it's about, is a multi-year research initiative, but this is about modelling of data and research that we now wish to collect so that we can compare different scenarios. If we carry on with the current trajectory, what are we going to have? And what is going to be the outcome in terms of health, education, and so on? And if we make changes, if the government and others were to make changes in structures, what would the alternative outcomes be like, and how can things be changed to make that happen? So that's just a very broad outline, because what we found in the first study was that the demographics were looking very grim in terms of land ownership, in terms of government policies, lending support tax, in terms of professional involvement in planning for housing, and in terms of need for attention, that there is just not enough houses being built, and Māori are locked out of that because most in fact, are unable to pay for the deposits, let alone the high private rentals and other aspects. Just mention another smaller study perhaps, but was really fundamental to what we're doing now, and that is one that had Christchurch health and other data. And what the researchers there looked at was, what are the likelihoods of Māori getting into their own house given health, education, family stability, jobs, and so on. And we found that those key factors encouraged the ability to get into houses if some of those weren't in place, such as poor health, low educational attainment, and so on, no stable family, that it was much, much more difficult for Māori to get into housing. So moving on to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. This is an outline of the methodology that we're adopting for this current statistical modelling study. So instead of a standard approach and interviews and so on, this is a co-creation outline. And so I'm currently looking for those who might take part as collaborators in the study, those who have information that we can model, who would be willing to share it, those who want particular questions answered, and those who might want to be partners in the study as well. So I'm talking to somewhat the same people that I talked to before, but also others that are suggested who may want to, for instance, compare information to do with Kāinga housing with what are the outcomes from Māori living in a subdivision, and what are other factors we should be taking into account which might assist with getting Māori into housing, basically. So the last slide. This is in case you want to take part in this study. If you have experience or anything that you would like to share or have questions that you would like answered, this is my contact information. So this is available right at the start of part of co-creation. If you want to take part, let me know. Next slide, please. And finally, there's 3 things from the cleanliness study I wanted to mention. And the first is emergency housing, because if the trajectory continues the way it's going, and it seems like it very likely will, because house prices are still going up and rentals are still going up in private rental accommodation, that there'll be more and more need for emergency housing. I talked to an emergency housing provider who is Island Child. Daniel Berghan was the CEO of Island Child, and I talked to both her and some of the women who had been helped by Island Child. These were women with young children who were the most vulnerable, looking for housing, desperately needing housing, and some of them who had been living out of cars or couch surfing for more than 2 years. So in extreme need. And I found that many of them had the same problem. They had got into debt, had debt issues, and partly because they had been sent to look for private rental, had moved into private rental. It just isn't affordable if you are living on a benefit. Very, very difficult. And so they had built up debt, they had family issues, unstable families. They also had health issues, and particularly depression. If you've been living out of a car for a couple of years, I can understand that the life becomes very, very black for them. So looking at what is the need for emergency housing and how can more be provided. Second thing I was just going to mention, if I could have that last slide again, was the leadership that communities play in bringing communities together. And this was a photograph of a hui, a pōhuri, actually, that Mad Ave, a community leader, held for all the new residents in their street, and they exchanged information, they ate together, and they formed a link of who has a lawnmower, who can share other things, who has children. So that's just one example of trying to bring a community together when everybody moving in is new. And the final thing, very briefly, social procurement or even cultural procurement is a way of using big contracts to provide input into a community. And it is used in Britain, in Europe, Australia. Aboriginal firms are given options for contracts that are being let. And that is something that I think should come in New Zealand. We are not doing it yet, so why don't we? So back to you, Kim. Kia ora koutou.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Di. That was an amazing presentation that really highlighted a lot of the issues in the sector, and you've obviously been involved in a huge variety of work. We've had some questions in, so some of our attendees are very keen on contacting you. So I've said we'll make the slides available on both on the community research website and our Facebook discussion group. So there is an opportunity for people to join up with our Facebook discussion group, community research Facebook discussion group, or to put their questions into the chat feed, and we'll make sure we respond to those as we go. So thank you again, Di, and I'd like to introduce our next two presenters, a couple of lovely wahine who are residing in and around Kirikiriroa. So originally from Himatangi, Rangimahora has worked for Rauawaawa Kaumātua Charitable Trust since 2010, and she's been working with Kaumātua, or those she describes as ngā matauranga taonga, and it makes Rauawaawa a very special place to be. Rangimahora has been educated at Massey University and has spent the last 3 decades making a mighty contribution to both the health and education sectors. And with her is Yvonne Wilson, who has experience in managing and leading a for Kaumātua and by Kaumātua organisation in Kirikiriroa. She also brings health and education and social services networks together, serving Kaumātua. She's got specialist expertise in project management, financial management and business development. A great person to have on your team. She co-leads the project and specifically managed contractual and working relationships with the advisory and expert groups for the work that they've done. So they're going to share an amazing piece, and I haven't got my booklet with me, but we have a few other presenters that have it. So over to you, Rangimahora and Yvonne. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi kia koutou, ko rangitu mai te maunga, ko Rauamahanga te awa, ko kahununu ki Wairapa te iwi, ko takitimu te waka, kei te mahi, e koro wai mana ki te runanga o Kirikiriroa, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora katoa, he mihi aroha kia koutou. A huge mihi to you, Kim and David, for running this for us and inviting us to be part of this. Ko tararua te maunga ko manoa tū te awa, ko Raukawa Ngāti Mani o Poto, rangita me Waikato Tainui me Ngāti Rangi Wewehi o ku iwi, ko Rangimahora hau, and it's lovely to be here with everybody. Kia ora.
So we're going to start this morning by just sharing why we participated in this research and what was the driver for us to actually be where we are today with in regards to the research and the development. So probably back in the late 1980s, Rauawaawa at that time was presenting, it was set up for Kaumātua by Kaumātua, and Rangimahora can talk about that part, but the housing crisis was still evident way back then. And although it was being dismissed, we were finding that Kaumātua were presenting homeless, They were moving out of their own whare so their whānau could have a roof over their head. We had, you know, kaumātua also residing in vehicles, which wasn't spoken about. It was just happening. And so that drove Te Runanga o Kirikiriroa at that time to say, what is it that we can do to make a difference in the lives of our kuia and karawa? And hence the reason why we're as part of this research. So the first part was really around how do we capture the data and the information, and these 3 documents were the first pieces out of the National Science Challenge, Building Better Homes, Towns and Cities. He Kāinga pai rawa, a really good home is where we were heading. And the Runanga, in partnership with Rauawaawa, decided to build, purpose-build, fit-for-purpose kaumātua housing villages. And so I'm going to let Rangimahora now talk about her part in where we're at with this.
And so following on from my tuakana, at that particular time, so in the development of it, the process that was used was highly interactive with our kaumātua. So we're building for kaumātua, and so they were at the core of the design process. So a committee of kaumātua, we set up some of our kaumātua that were part of that group, had different physical abilities, different mental health challenges. So it was really important that we capture a wide range because that was reflective of who might live in that particular village. And that was intended. And they gave some wonderful insight that you wouldn't necessarily get if you just left it within the building and designing sphere. There's something about lived experience that you won't find in textbooks. And I think that's the value of having those you serve at the very core of the decision making when you're designing things for them, particularly homes. And that's so, I don't know, are you able to pull up that PowerPoint, David? So I need to mihi to our University of Waikato colleagues. So even though the Kaumātua Village, the very first one was opened in 2012, and the second part was followed in 2013, and that what we knew from experience, so being we're a community-based organisation, we focus on kaumātua and our kipo, health and well-being, welfare, recreation, housing. We don't own houses, but we work really, really closely with those that do. And that's for the betterment and placement of kaumātua into warm and safe homes. But like Yvonne said, there was a situation of homelessness and it was growing, and it's still a challenge even today. So we're very fortunate that the Runanga took that leadership and built that village, because it's been like a flagship, I would say, nationally in terms of what can be achieved when you allow kaumātua voices to influence every aspect of the building process. And of course, our colleagues, Dr. Mary Simpson and Dr. Sophie Knott from the University of Waikato, I think great things happen in communities when you pair up with some wonderful brains. And that's exactly what we were able to do as a result of the resourcing that we received from the Building Better Homes, Towns and Cities National Science Challenge. So Jessica Hutchings and Ruth Berry have been extremely helpful for us in terms of guiding and resourcing the journey that we've had to our toolkit. Can you go to the next one, please? So as Yvonne showed you earlier, the 3 think pieces that were produced last year were a result of us going back through the National Science Challenge and being resourced to look at that building process that was used. So the first think piece covered the first phase of the research, which was basically interviewing the visionaries of the actual village itself. So how did it come about? Why did it come about? And of course, Yvonne was one of those visionaries that contributed to that, as well as Whakamāhorahora Belzer, who was CEO of Te Runanga o Kirikiriroa at that particular time. And that the second think piece was captured the implementation phase of the kaumātua More Crescent Village. And so that included voices from the policy makers to the funders, right through to the actual builders and the bankers themselves. So it was really important to find out how, what and why the things that happened the way they did in terms of helping make this a reality. The third one was going to the kaumātua themselves and their whānau and finding out about their experience at the village. What worked, what didn't work, how could it be made better if this model was going to be used as a bit of a flagship for others to model off, or to use as a basis to create their own models. And so those think pieces were quite critical for us to gift to people who had been continuously, I guess, approaching Yvonne and myself, so the Runanga and Rauawaawa, to visit the village so they could find out how it was done. And so rather than have them have to approach us all the time, we thought developing those resources would give them a lot of insight without them having to make the the effort to journey all that way here, and for us to be available to, or particularly Yvonne, be available to show them through the village. So it was kind of our shortcut way of trying to help them out. And then of course we were offered the opportunity for more resourcing to just do a toolkit.
That's one of the interesting challenges in working in this space, and both Rangimahora and I are not researchers as such, academic researchers. We come from the experience, practical, hands-on service delivery side. And one of the things that happens, that we've found that happens, is that you gain this excitement and momentum to actually then go a little bit further, hence the extension to develop a toolkit that we could actually then share. If we could go to the next slide, please, David. That we could share out with communities who are really interested in getting in this space. And the toolkit actually starts to go through some key fundamental areas that we experienced ourselves, and we've put in checklists and things that we've learned along the way that may be just that guideline that organisations, marae, that want to get into building fit for purpose kaumātua housing might want to use moving into the future.
So one of the other things that we did was that we thought we better ask. So just like the model that was used in and around the building of the village, we thought if we're going to design a toolkit that's going to be helpful to people, we need to ask people, actually, what do you reckon, what should be in there? Because our heads are filled with the stuff that we think people might want to know, but to actually validate that, you've got to ask. And so a Kaumātua Housing Summit was held out at Hopu College, and we're really thankful to Carleen for, I guess, encouraging us to do that. So Carleen Tuna Puriri of Waikato Tainui. We were supported by a number of agencies, including MSD and Tupini Kōkiri in Waikato Tainui to do that, as well, of course, our BBHTC and the University of Waikato again. We had close to about 120 people turn up to that summit, and there was a range from our policymakers right through to our marae and to our iwi, kaumātua themselves, our kaumātua service providers, both Maori and mainstream. So it was really, really helpful to get all those different perspectives and all those different voices in the room. So workshopping what might be useful to them in terms of a toolkit is what we based our toolkit on. Yeah. So you might want to go to the next one now, please, David.
We're just going to give you a little insight into the toolkit. And so the toolkit really followed on from the three think pieces around, so how do you create this vision? Where do you start? Who are the people you need to engage with? And moved on to building collaborative relationships and partnerships, which are key and fundamental to a successful community-based project, in the sense that actually if you don't have the right partners in the room, then actually you're just going to go round and round in circles, and you're not going to be able to achieve that vision and aspiration that you're looking for from the outset. The other part is about leading the project. Good leadership The leadership that we used was community-based leadership. So initially we didn't employ big consultants to lead out our projects. We had people that had a passion but also had some really good leadership qualities and could engage with our kaumātua along that journey and that pathway as well. So with them, not without them, is the philosophy that we took on board. Cool. Next slide, please.
And then, so the other part, so married with the information that came out of the think pieces and the feedback from the Housing Summit, these were two aspects that they really identified they needed more information on. So understanding funding and finance. At the time of Moore Crescent Village build, government had in place a social housing unit which had capital grants available for builds. Unfortunately, that's not the case right at this moment, but we're certain with the wonderful government we have that there'll be a change. And that, so funding and finance is a real key part in terms of the bill. So we took out the points that they wanted to know. We've given as many sources of information, and like Yvonne said, we also put checklists in place. But those are the nuts and bolts of things that need to be right, you know, in terms of the process, so that you don't finish or that you actually reach the finish line, and that also you finish having caused least harm to your community because you're able to do it within the resources that are available. But the co-creation, that was something else that they also wanted information on, is how does that work? Like, how do you actually co-create with kaumātua to make sure that it is fit for purpose and design? And so we've just shared some of the insights that we had on our journey, or the Runanga had on the journey in terms of the build, and that we learned from the research that we undertook. So all the secret sauce is basically in the toolkit. The next page, please.
One of the other important aspects was about building kaumātua-centred tenancy relationships. This took, one of the things that this brought to the surface was the need for kaumātua to be able to determine how they wanted their village to run. This wasn't about the Runanga as the landlord coming in and saying, this is how everything's going to happen. So kaumātua have taken a lead in that space. So we've shared some of that experience and some of the checklists around setting up, so the kaumātua themselves run their meetings, then they come back to us and tell us what their needs are. The wraparound services with Rauawaawa Kaumātua Trust, that's what makes this project unique. People talk about wraparound services, but what does that really mean? And in the sense of the kaumātua village, the Rauawa provide the care, the health, the wellness, and the Runanga does the landlord tenancy management side of things. And that's that partnership. And so we've shared some of those experiences with you as well. And caring for your asset. If we don't care for our asset, have quality assets, then actually who's being disadvantaged? It's the people and the whānau, our kaumātua who are living in our whare. So just, we have 14 homes currently. We have another 2 that we lease back, but we are building stock in this space as we grow too.
We look forward to opportunities, you know, in terms of investment in the housing space for kaumātua builds, just for whānau builds really. And we acknowledge that it's at this stage that it is because there's not enough stock that is appropriate to care for our kaumātua. That's the biggest challenge that we find at the moment in terms of supporting those that are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. Okay.
So just wrapping up our presentation, yesterday, so we will kind of pass that slide, but we'll share these slides out with you because our time is running out. But yesterday we had the privilege of being with Kay Saville-Smith and Bev James and just doing a plug-in for their older persons renters toolkit and the amazing work that they've done around this resource as well. So I'm sure that Kim will be able to provide some information on how they can get in contact with Kay or be around this as well, because all of these resources complement all the work that's happening across the science challenges. Kia ora.
So the think pieces in our toolkit are available from the Building Better Homes, Towns and Cities National Science Challenge website. All of those are available. Or if you want to find out more, there's always the 2019 National Kaumātua Service Conference from the 19th to the 21st of November in Aotearoa, and I hope to see you there.
Kia ora.
Kia ora korua. He mihi mahana kia korua mō tēnā rangahau. I think you're showing incredible manaaki for our tino taonga, and the principles of sharing with others, all the good work that you're doing and finding ways of communicating that. And it's very clear, good research is useful research, and your research is incredibly useful, you know, and supportive both to our communities, but also to those who are making decisions about where resources go. And I look forward to your next innovation. I will say one thing though, you're definitely researchers, and I guess you're really the ethos of you know, community researchers working in that space and making it happen. So I would like to come back later and ask you a few more questions about the process of research inside of the challenge. But I've got one more speaker this morning. Last but not least, it's James Berghan. So James is Te Rarawa and Te Aupōuri. He's a licensed cadastral surveyor, and I hope I said that right. He's also a PhD candidate about to submit at the University of Otago. And after working on a range of planning, subdivision and land development projects in Waikato, he returned to the School of Surveying in Dunedin to research alternative housing development models. His PhD project is part of the Building Better Homes, Towns and Cities research program, and looks at the critical success factors of co-housing and urban papakainga. He's a member of the Kāinga Tahi Kaingarua research team, looking at rangatahi Māori perceptions and aspirations related to housing. And I think he presented at the Shift Aotearoa Housing Conference and had some good perspectives to really bring to the forum in terms of rangatahi expectations for housing. So kia ora e mōrena ki a koe, James.
Mōrena, and yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kim. Ko James Berghan taku ingoa, heuri tēnei no Te Rarawa me Te Aupōuri. No ahipara me te oneroa a tohe ahau, kei o te poti taku kāinga I nainei. Yeah, mōrena koutou. I'm James, and yeah, as Kim mentioned, I'm a PhD student at the University of Otago down in Dunedin, looking at co-housing in papakainga and some lived experiences in those in an urban context. But today I was hoping to speak a little bit about a separate project that I worked on, looking at rangatahi perceptions and aspirations in terms of housing. Do we have the slides? Oh, there we go. Cool. Yeah, so I'm giving this little talk on behalf of myself, Maya Ratana, who is an architecture student at Unitec in Auckland, and Jackie Paul, who was a Māori housing researcher at AUT in Auckland as well. This project really came about from a conversation, I suppose, that if you're not represented at the decision-making table, then where's your voice? You kind of risk getting left out, or at worst still, you might find yourself on the chopping block. And rangatahi Māori are often not part of the conversation, or are rarely invited to the table when it comes to decisions around shaping the future of our cities in particular. So there's this real gap in what do rangatahi Māori want in terms of housing, in terms of papakainga. What are their aspirations for the future? How do they want to live? All these kind of questions. And I guess how can we as rangatahi Māori or rangatahi adjacent researchers start to ask some of these questions, because ultimately rangatahi are the future, and so the decisions that we make today will inform how they live in the future. So we've framed this project with a specific focus on rangatahi, and specifically rangatahi Māori, because Māori are a relatively young population. I think as of the last, or the 2013 census, the median age for Māori was around 24 years of age. So half of all Māori are under 24. And if you think how many of those will be under 18, that kind of leaves a big gap in terms of a Māori political voice or a Māori presence. Comparatively, the median age for Europeans was 41 years of age. So there's a bit of a difference in terms of the political voice going on there. So what do we do? Let's jump to the next slide, please. So we held 3 mini wānanga across the country. So one in Kaikohe, one in Auckland, and one down here in Dunedin, with 3 quite diverse groups of rangatahi. So we had a range of rangatahi from urban settings and rural settings, from different living situations at different stages of their lives. So some at high school, some at uni, some working professionals, and some with young families of their own as well. And with different backgrounds or involvement in te ao Māori. So some totally comfortable and some just starting their journey in te ao Māori. These, I think they took place almost a year to the day actually, back in August 2018, with roughly 10 participants at each hui. So I wanted to talk, or just highlight one kind of key finding from the process, the methods that we used, and one about the findings themselves. So next slide. Cool. One of the key findings in terms of the methods was that we employed a strategy of having rangatahi as keynote speakers. So initially we planned to do like a small presentation ourselves as the researchers, but we ended up flipping that up actually, and so one rangatahi participant at each wānanga presented on some mahi that they've been up to, and so it was a really great chance for them to kind of share their knowledge and empower and inspire some of the other rangatahi that were there. It really, for me personally, it really broke down that power dynamic of like, we're the researchers, they're the researched kind of thing. It was more of a conversation and a more reciprocal relationship. And yeah, it was quite cool seeing the other rangatahi be inspired by those in the group, not from us as our kind of privileged research position as such. So there's, yeah, Pania Newton was our keynote in our Auckland wānanga there. This next slide. In terms of the findings themselves about housing perceptions and aspirations, there's quite a lot of diversity depending on the different ages, even within that the rangatahi frame that we set, as well as what kind of occupation or what kind of life experience they had to date as well. So in Kaikohe, most of the rangatahi were high school students. They're quite optimistic about the future and optimistic about how housing might develop over time for them. So there were aspirations to kind of stay out of debt, have big healthy homes, and where there's a space and a place for everyone. On the other hand, some of the slightly older rangatahi in Auckland and Dunedin had more mixed views, I suppose. So they had aspirations for sustainable Kāinga and whānau housing, but coupled with the realities of high house prices, unaffordability, and potentially the idea of having to leave the city. So they're quite aware, I suppose, of the barriers that they faced when it came to housing. A lot of them were renting houses of their own, or had some kids of their own as well, so they were quite familiar with the process of renting and having to meet those everyday living costs and things like that. And a lot of them felt that housing was kind of something that's out of reach in their current situation without something changing. Dunedin, one of the biggest things was housing quality. So there's some pretty shocking examples of the housing quality down here, and I suppose almost justified that it's student housing, it's a rite of passage, that roughing it is something that they kind of have to go through, and I can personally attest to that. I think I had a flat which didn't actually have any windows in 1 year, so that was a different experience. But it really comes back to that notion that housing is a human right, that everyone has a right to a healthy, safe home. And just because we're students or they're students, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't deserve healthy homes to live in. So although some of the specific findings were a little different across the groups, they really spoke to this overarching central theme about rangatahi just trying to get by in a world that marginalises rangatahi and marginalises Maori norms in particular. So there was a quote from one of our Auckland participants that buying a house is so unrealistic for us, so we're looking at alternative ways. And so they're looking at things like intergenerational housing, like Papa Kāinga. But it comes back to the notion that these shouldn't be alternatives, these should be norms. Why have these norms been marginalised so that they're alternatives? And I guess how do we reclaim them so that they're not considered alternatives? Just jump to the last slide. Yeah, so those are just a couple of highlights from this project, and really we only scratched the surface of what rangatahi see and perceive in their future. So some were concerned about the future, especially the ones that already had young children of their own. Others were just trying to get by and hoped that their housing situations or their housing options might be different one day. But the aspirations were never self-seeking, and it was always inclusive and always to the benefit of everyone around them. We found it was really cool that rangatahi Māori were really willing to share their views as well and their perceptions and perceptions of housing so that they can contribute to the spaces that they lived in. A few really highlighted the fact that they'd never been asked these kind of questions before, and so they're really grateful for the opportunity to have that kōrero and share their experiences with us. And so I suppose the question now is that this was a pilot project. We do have the opportunity now to build on this. So we're really keen to hear from anyone. If you've got any ideas or connections or networks or rangatahi that might be interested in joining us and continuing the charge with this mahi, because we've got this kōrero and now we've got to try and work out what do we do with it, how do we actually affect some change with that. That's my little speed presentation. Cheers.
Kia ora, James. That was awesome. Why am I echoing here? I'm losing my volume down a bit. See if it makes sense. You raised a huge amount. Well, I guess it's an option and a voice that's very overlooked in the sector. So it's really great to hear that those challenges are being put into those who are considering housing needs. Yes, I have lived in a few student squats myself across the country, and I have to say, and overseas actually, but it affects your health. It affects, if you're trying to study, you having to go to places that stay warm, and it's not right. And the links to human rights are certainly something that we should be focusing on in terms of where we're going as a nation. So thank you, James, for your work, and I hope that it continues. I'll just do a little plug here before we start going into questions, and that's just to tell people who may be new to us about community research. So we're an organisation that seeks to convene the research community, the community research community across Aotearoa. We're the place to find webinars, resources and research for the tangata whenua community and voluntary sector. We've got some upcoming webinars and we encourage people to register online. We've got a couple coming up in October that we've booked on, and we also have new and emerging community researcher awards. And I encourage Fire's Rangimahora and Yvonne, and James to enter our awards this year. And there's information on our website about that. So I have a few questions for you, and I'm aware we've got probably about 10 minutes to get through those. So I guess my first question is really around, you know, what to you, actually, if you can be pretty brief or to the point in your answers, what is the benefit of the national, what has been the benefit of being part of the National Science Challenge, please? And I'll throw over to you, Diane, first, please.
Thank you, Kim. One of the benefits has been the networking that all the different groups do, and the coming together of a whole lot of really knowledgeable team members to share that information. So there's been resources there, such as communication. You saw some of the rather exciting covers of reports. The team put those reports into a format that can be downloaded, and so it really is a well-resourced team, good leadership, but really getting to meet all those other researchers and sharing what works, what doesn't, has been a huge benefit.
Rangimahora and Yvonne.
That I've certainly experienced and being part of this research is really.
Oh, we've got a mute on. Oh, sorry.
After 30 years of community development, understanding that research can make a difference, that it's not just literature on a shelf, and I think that that's been the motivator and the driver for me to participate in this research, these research projects.
I think the National Science Challenges have provided a platform for some amazing relationships to be built, for perspectives to be integrated, so that what's created is something that's actually quite transformational for the community. I just think the whole community voice and the academic voice has been able to be used to maximum advantage, and it's really, really beautiful to work alongside you know, some really, really brainy people, and that both in the academic space and in the community space, and to be exposed to the work that they're doing and the stuff that's going on in the sector. I think it's definitely been a change maker.
James.
Yeah, hello.
Hey.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing as well. The relationships across the challenge, really, because it's a cross-discipline, multi-institution kind of way of doing research. From me being a PhD student, anyway, everyone kind of talks about the PhD as being this really isolating, long, dragged out kind of thing where you're just by yourself, which sometimes it is, but because I've done it through the National Science Challenge, there's been a great network of other Maori researchers and people doing all sorts of awesome things, which is, I think my PhD experience has been quite unique because of it, if that makes sense.
Kia ora. So somebody has expressed an interest in terms of okay, so there's something here around what are the alternatives to the current housing crisis? I'm not quite sure what that means. And the other question we have is there's some photo order community researchers up in Auckland who are very keen to make contact with you as researchers, so, and they're keen to look at what you're doing next, so we're going to put them in touch with you. Sorry. I guess the question then is, does any of your research respond to the housing crisis in terms of affordability and accessibility? So over to you first, James, you may as well.
Yeah, so probably more through my PhD stuff than the Rangatahi project, and particularly that question about what are the alternatives to current housing, the current housing crisis. So I'm a surveyor. The norm in surveying is to design these little standalone houses on sections. there are different types of development, but it's really trying to shift that that culture of the quarter acre section and highlight that the success of other alternative ways of living, so medium density, co-housing, urban papakainga, where there's a kind of social element to it. And then the financial options that Diane might be able to speak to as well, in terms of kind of rent to buy options, land rent options, lots of different ways to try and get people on the ladder to that spectrum of home ownership, I suppose.
Yeah. Di?
Sharing the best information that comes from, I think I'm muted at the moment.
No, you're good.
Thank you. Sharing some of those good ideas, such as shared equity. Some of them aren't new, but when it proves to work, it's something that can be shared with others. Also, the data that we're collecting now, I think it was concerned of what's the alternative. That's exactly what we're looking at, modelling what will be the outcome if we keep on the way we're going, and if we make changes, such as in some of the structural things in government, not sending young Māori women off into private rentals that they can't afford to pay for instance, other sorts of support that we can bring about changes, supporting education so that people can get better paying jobs rather than at the lowest end of the spectrum. These are some of the things that will start to bring about change. And so providing that information for decision makers so that they can rely on what they're doing will bring about those changes that we're working towards.
And there's a question, and I think you're appropriate to answer this, really. There's obviously people who are keen to collaborate, so is there any scope to collaborate, to work together in this space? Is it sometimes difficult to contest for these research grants? And working together we can benefit a lot more. Do you have a whakaaro on that?
That's why it's been set up as...
Sorry. Yep. I was going to pass that over to Rangimahora, and if that's okay, Di?
Yeah, sorry, I'm missing out some of your...
Oh, kia ora koutou. So, yeah, absolutely, we're open to collaborate because, so our next kaupapa is about trialling the Kaumātua housing toolkit in those areas that are ready to build, basically, and seeing how it might support them. But one of the things that we do know, Kim, is that with New Zealand heading towards 1 in 4 of our population being over 65 by 2041, that there's just not enough stock at the moment to look after our current kaumātua, let alone those that we know are on the way and they're into that space. So we are on a pathway of not just doing the build and the wraparound services, which we know works, but we're also looking at a means of addressing financial poverty in kaumātua, which comes back to your affordability question earlier. So what we know is the pension is roughly about $20,000 a year. And so even in the most affordable of rents, when you look at the IRRS, when that's applied to kaumātua, there's still very little to eat with and pay all the other bills. So social enterprise is, I guess, the next aspect that we're looking at as a way of how do you build these communities of kaumātua in whānau, and how do you make them financially sustainable? So that's our next interest area.
We are just about out of time, and I guess the question back to the person who asked the question about collaboration is that most of our panellists, actually all of our panellists today have expressed a desire to collaborate on any research going forward, and so their contact details will be available. Otherwise, get in touch with me at Community Research via email, and I will put you in touch with these amazing people who have done absolutely awesome work. I would like to mihi to you all for your preparation, for your time and for your sharing. We'll make these slides available on the community research discussion page, and probably also, definitely actually also on our website, but those who registered will get an advance copy via email. So in future, make sure you register people. Just he mihi nui kia koutou katoa mō tēnei wā. I hope those who attended got some good stuff out of it. I know there was lots of learning for me, and I wish you all the best with the future research in this. Ngā mihi.